Jason, thank you so much for joining us once again. This week, we're going to be talking stormwater, hot topic for people all the time. Let's talk a little bit about stormwater fees and what they go towards. So when I pay my fee, what is it, twice a year or something? What is it going towards?
So you got to think about the stormwater fee kind of like a utility fee. Now here in Chesapeake, obviously there's no separate fee for waste management or recycling, but in a lot of other municipalities, there is a fee for that. Well, the stormwater fee here in Chesapeake, you should consider a utility fee. It provides that funding that is so important for the stormwater management. So you're thinking about, well, what is stormwater management? Well, that fee allows the city to do all the things that manages runoff from rainwater, stormwater, hence the name, to minimize flooding. It keeps our waterways clean. It protects the drinking water supply. And of course, now more than ever, as we're here in the middle of a pandemic, you got to think about how important human health is when it comes to having clean drinking water and clean waterways. So the stormwater fee that you pay here in Chesapeake is critical to allowing city forces to continue to improve and the water supply and the water quality here in Chesapeake. And there are a lot of different ways that the city does that. A whole bevy of operations that we do, including but not limited to the street sweepers that you see out on the roadways. In fiscal year 2019, our street sweepers cleaned almost 16,000 lane miles of roadway and streets.
Wow.
And we collected nearly 7,000 tons of trash and debris from the streets. Now, what does it have to do with stormwater?
Yeah.
Well, when it rains, everything in the gutters gets washed into the storm drains, and that the storm drains can get blocked, and that creates an issue with drainage. Not to mention the fact that the more pollutants that get into that waterway, the worse the water quality. So things like street sweepers, really important. Drainage ditches, especially in the more rural and southern parts of the city, you'll notice driving along those roads, you'll see those big drainage ditches. Well, they are also critically important to draining water off of property, out of the right of way, and getting that water downstream to where it needs to go. And keeping those ditches maintained is essential to the stormwater program. So in fiscal year 2019, we cleared 200 miles of those ditches. Wow. And got about 6,700 tons of sediment and debris that have built up and prevented proper drainage. So that's also really important. There's pipes under the ground. You can't see them, but they're there. About 19 miles of those pipes were flushed in fiscal year 2019. 541 tons of sediment and debris were cleaned out of those pipes. So just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there and not having a huge impact on the drainage that throughout the city. 704 catch basins we inspected and serviced. 689 cave-ins were reported and serviced, and the cave-in is where you have a pipe that collapses, and sometimes you'll see that maybe in front of your house or on the sidewalk. And that
looks
is
like a big
not
pothole
only
or something.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Not only a drainage issue, but that's a public safety issue. So the stormwater fee helps our forces in that respect go out and service this critical infrastructure that is so important to the city. Stormwater pollution incidents is something that you think about. We have a team of environmental specialists here that when residents call to report illegal dumping or illegal drainage, we actually send inspectors out to investigate those situations. And oftentimes they'll result in a report of illegal dumping, or people pouring oil or other pollutants or contaminants into the waterway. Well, we investigate those cases and actually fine folks for doing the wrong thing. And the stormwater fee supports that program so we can ensure that everyone is not polluting our waterways. Inspections of active construction sites. Of course, when you have development, you're going to have soil disturbance, and that has an impact on surrounding waterways. So the stormwater program is essential to ensuring that all that new development and construction doesn't have a negative impact on waterways as the development continues throughout the city. And then obviously there are inspections of our stormwater management treatment facilities, which are so critical to ensuring clean, safe drinking water throughout Chesapeake.
So, my gosh, that list. First of all, lots of things that you really don't necessarily connect with stormwater. Like when I hear from residents, it's very often questions about the maintenance of their ditch. Is it my job? Is it your job? But I'm really glad that you were able to list out so many of the different pieces of the whole stormwater picture, because they really do all fit together and they're all so important. And Chesapeake's a big place. And we are surrounded and just full of waterways and rivers and streams. And so I think that puts some good perspective on what your stormwater fees are going towards, and the fact that they simply can't go towards everything. So let's transition into a little bit about ditch maintenance, property owner responsibilities, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So as we talked about before, and as you said perfectly, Chesapeake is a huge city when it comes to terms of land area. It's the 17th largest city in the country at last calculation per land mass. So it's really gigantic. And you have a lot of different kinds of environments and neighborhoods here, from urban to rural, moving north to south. So a lot of different challenges and a lot of different kind of topography in Chesapeake. But what you'll see in a lot of our neighborhoods is you'll notice that there are these stormwater ditches, whether they're at the roadside or in some cases they run onto private property. So the age-old question from our residents is, here's a stormwater drainage ditch. It's growing up. There's a lot of grass in it. It's maybe getting some sediment built up. Whose responsibility is it to maintain this drainage ditch? And the simple answer to that question is, if that ditch carries water or drainage from public city property, then it's the city's responsibility to go in and maintain that ditch. If that ditch doesn't carry drainage from a public property, so in other words, if your backyard just drains into this ditch that's alongside your house, that's the responsibility of the landowner or the homeowner whose ditch runs alongside. That's kind of the general rule of thumb for when it comes to ditch maintenance. And in a perfect world, the city would be able to maintain every ditch that we have. But the reality is there are over 2,700 miles of open ditch. We've got 1,100 miles of underground pipe. There are 37,000 drainage structures in Chesapeake. That's an overwhelming amount of drainage infrastructure. And unfortunately, the city, and I would contend that no city has the resources to maintain that year-round when needed. So the way this typically works is when there's a ditch that drains public water onto public or off of public property into a public waterway, that's typically city's responsibility. And if you notice that that ditch is becoming clogged, or there's a lot of vegetation, or the water is beginning to pool and not drain the way it should, we encourage folks to give us a call at 382 City and report that, because what'll happen is we'll send an investigator out to inspect that ditch, and that's going to probably result most times in a work order for our operations team to go out and clear the sediment out of that ditch, do the vegetation control, get whatever's preventing that water from draining and flowing properly out of there. And again, we have a regular maintenance schedule. It's a 5 to 6 year maintenance schedule on these ditches where we try to work through this rotation. But of course, there are just so many of them that we need to maintain. And there are going to be situations with vegetation and sediment where some of these ditches get clogged really badly before we're able to get to it on the routine schedule. So it's so important for folks to call us at 382 City and report those stormwater blockages when they see them, so that the most critical of those blockages we can get to ensure that there aren't any flood issues. And those flooding issues can lead to a bunch of other secondary issues. You've got standing water. It's humid down here. It's swampy down here. We all know that we've got a mosquito issue sometimes in the summer, standing water, mosquitoes, etc., other environmental concerns. As far as private ditches, we do encourage homeowners and landowners to step up and to maintain those, ensure that the sediment doesn't build up in those ditches, ensure that the vegetation is managed. And no, that doesn't mean you have to cut everything out of the ditch, but generally make sure that those ditches have the ability to carry water freely as it drains into that ditch. That's the purpose of it.
And so much of this is setting expectations. So we've talked about that big picture. Chesapeake is massive. We, are doing everything we can with the resources and the time that we have. But something interesting that I learned when I first started working for the city was the difference between a ditch that is working versus one that is not. And the idea that just because you see some water in your ditch after a big rain, that doesn't mean it's not working. Tell me a little bit about what to expect as far as how do I know if there's an issue or not?
Absolutely. So just like you said, Liz, water pooling in a ditch is natural. These these ditches are meant to collect and then drain and distribute water. And it's not going to be like an open pipe that water is just going to flow immediately away. So when you see water, especially after a rain event, or if we've had a flooding event, you're going to see some of this water in these ditches occasionally. The water table here in Chesapeake is very high. This is a low-lying area, so that's natural. What we don't want to see is where you have water that's starting to really build up in those ditches and stack up, breach the top of those of the ditch banks or slopes, and start to flow onto private property and pull elsewhere in the property. That's when we know there's going to be a problem. But to see some degree of water in these ditches that run alongside property and alongside the roads in Chesapeake, especially after a rain in the summertime, in the springtime, that's normal. If you think that it's not draining properly, or if you notice that water is not receding over time, absolutely, please report that and we'll send an investigator out to check that. But know that the nature of drainage, it's not like dumping water into a bathtub or a sink and watching it flow down the pipe. There is going to be some natural flow of that water, and it's going to happen gradually depending on how much water is in that ditch, what the rainfall is like, where the water table is at, and what other factors are happening with water coming from other areas draining from the surrounding land. So it's not perfect, but if that drainage is not working, it's certainly going to be noticeable after time. So we ask folks to keep that in mind when they're looking at the ditches and the condition of that ditches before they give us a call to come out and inspect and potentially service that ditch.
Okay, one last thing before we go. We are getting ready to head into the peak of hurricane season. You guys kind of drop everything when we see a storm coming up the coast to check on some known choke points. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, we have a very active first response posture when it comes to tropical storms, hurricanes, or even predicted heavy rains. Again, because of that high water table here, we are well versed in what our vulnerabilities are as far as areas and neighborhoods throughout town that have historically flooded or had flooding issues during storms. So we'll send a team of operations folks out to hit these target areas, whether it's doing some pipe washing, whether it's in our lake drainage system, doing some modifications to the system there to allow for maximum capacity in that system because of the expected precipitation and drainage from flooding and rainfall and whatnot. So throughout hurricane season, that is one of our foremost priorities in the stormwater operations team. We are prepared for it. We monitor forecasts with our emergency management team weighing in, giving us data, National Weather Service data, just to make sure that we're ahead of the curve. So every time there's a storm, we know what to expect. This is, again, an experienced, well-versed team who knows the lay of the land here in Chesapeake, knows the system, knows where those choke points and vulnerabilities are, and can typically respond in a way that mitigates the worst of the flooding. What we ask our residents to do, especially in the summertime as we go into the fall, because hurricane season runs into kind of that beginning of autumn period, is to make sure in front of your property, in front of your home, that your storm drains are clear, especially when the leaves start to come down, or even grass clippings. If you're out cutting your lawn, grass clippings and leaves from trees can build up in storm drains and catch basins and really, really wreak havoc on drainage from storms. And when coupled with heavy precipitation from, say, a tropical storm system, that can be really, really bad situation for your neighborhood, and it can exacerbate, flooding or cause flooding if flooding wasn't already going to be an issue. So we ask folks when they're doing their yard maintenance, if it's cutting the grass or if it's raking leaves, just to ensure that they take a peek at those storm drains and catch basins to make sure that they're not blocked by leaves, because that can really, really wreak havoc on drainage. That's a way that residents can help us, in addition to all the things that we're doing here in a preventative measure when it comes to drainage and flooding in neighborhoods, especially during hurricane season.
Jason, thank you so much. That really helped give us more of a big picture, kind of set the expectations for what we can all be expecting from the city and what the city expects from residents. So really, at the end of the day, don't throw junk in the storm drain or your ditch. Keep it clear. Jason Brown, Public Works, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Liz.
If you need further information on how the city manages stormwater, and that includes ditches and pipes and Everything stormwater. Visit cityofchesapeake.net/stormwater.